Good evening. And we'll start by reading a little bit, explaining a little bit, and then good evening. And we'll start by reading a little bit, explaining a little bit, and then we'll go on. So you can throw things at me. I'm going to go straight into the narrative, to sort of drop you into the interior of it, and then talk around it a little bit more. So, in a house, in a German city that's been transposed to Africa, there's a series of strange things occurring beneath the house. There's a series of creatures that are taking care of a small cyclops, and that cyclops is growing as a child, and it's trying to find its way in the world, and trying to find its way with them. It knows nothing else at this point. Vorrh is called, the house is called Vorrh, which is the same as the actual house in the city of Halle, which is a twin city to Leipzig. Good evening, gentlemen. Nice to see you. Vorrh wanted to be empty. The house thought it had completed its business with full-time occupancy many years before. Yet while the house contained no people, in the poet's hollowness of its rooms, but above ground, in the basement was a well of astonishing depth. If it were given sky, it would reflect the most distant galaxies in its sightless water. The old dark house was always alert and guarding what occurred beneath it. There, under Vorrh was the crated machines and stagnant presses, boxcar boys and empty stained vessels. Ishmael was becoming a man. His docile white body was beginning to tussle and shape itself for a different purpose, though it would never be as hard as the kin. He was made of flesh, like animals. They were made of bakelite, like furniture. Their bodies were perfect in their gleam and the depth of their polished surfaces. Each was unique, beautifully variants of a form and appointment. He forever marvelled at their splendour while examining the flabby imperfection of his own shell. Over time, he became more and more intrigued by Lalua. She was unlike the others, not because she was female. That was explained to him before. There were 4 kinds of things like him in the world: men, women, animals, and ghosts. He was a man, like Abel and Seth. Lalua was a woman, like Achilea. He was just a different kind. Men had tubes and strength. Women had pouches and gentleness. He had a little of all. He had first felt heat for Lalua when she killed an animal for him, snapping it in her long, shiny fingers. She opened it for him to taste and smell, and explained that its insides were a copy of his, made in the same materials, unlike her own, which were modelled from a different substance. She had described how the thick, soft covering kept the animal warm, and in time he too would have such, and it would look carefully, and if he looked carefully near the lamp, he could see tiny traces of growth already there on his pliant skin. She had extended her smooth, graceful arm and showed him the absence of hair. He had flushed, felt ashamed and badly made. He wanted to hold his breath and suck all the traces of animal back into his shell, wanted every hair to shrivel and glaze over towards her perfection. She had explained before that he was too soft to grow, to expand from the inside out, or to puff up. She was fully formed and inflexible. This made no sense to him. Why would he have to grow into something where she was already there, immaculate? She tapped her brown shell and said that her skin was stiff and brittle, where his was pliant and cuttable. They were both vulnerable in different ways. She touched the back of his neck, stroking him with 2 perfect fingers, reassuring him of his place, his distinction, and her affection acceptance. The solidity and coolness of her touch excited him and tightened his lukewarm softness into tumescent mimicry. She pretended not to notice and drifted away from the shock on a wave of docile, ductile clicks and internal hisses, sounds he would remember throughout his tangible life. He lifted his gaze from his awkward lap to watch her move across the long room. Her walk was purposeful, smooth and exact, as if each of the 100 minor adjustments needed for proportion and balance were consciously thought about, carefully considered in fractions of time that were impossible to contemplate. He knew if he thought about walking like this, he would fall after a few steps. Such perfect control was unattainable to his jarring and ridiculous motion. Lalula was graceful and constant, while he was becoming more and more clumsy and random. Surges of emotion and eruption of ideas tossed his motley leaking being in unpredictable tides, causing him to invert doubt as a comparison, to invent doubt as a comparison, to construct anxiety as a mirror in opposition to flawlessness, knowing that only he would be seen in it. In the end, the others would quietly continue with that reflection. Sometimes when he watched them sleeping, becoming charged, he became fascinated by their stillness. He would sit very close to the lure and one of the others and watch for movement. Once Seth, who was standing close behind him, asked why he was looking so closely. "Because I think they are dead," he said, with a moment's thought. Seth put his hand on the boy's child's shoulder and made a rotational sound in his throat. "It's like the animals when they are broken," the boy said over his shoulder, without taking his eyes off the sleeping woman. "Before they break, they are entirely made of movement, and then it stops. Where does the movement go?" Seth moved the boy aside and knelt, looking with him. "It is true that all living things have movement, and it is necessary. It is also true that dead things do not move, but sometimes the movement is concealed in smallness and hides from sight. I will show you." Ishmael broke his stare to watch Seth speaking, looking at his words unfolding from his toothless mouth, focusing on the shudder flap dancing in his jaws. He slid away to the cabinet across the room and opened a drawer. He returned with quick purpose, carrying a glass tube as long as his arm and a small glass funnel. Kneeling again, this time between the Lula and the boy, rested one end of the tube on the sleeper's brow and attached the funnel to the other end. He put his fingers to his lips, hissed and winked. The boy understood and agreed. They moved stealthily so as not to awaken her. Seth put the cupped end of the funnel to the boy's ear, delicately placing the other end to the corner of the sleeper's closed eye. He froze there, half turning to watch the listener's face. At first, Ishmael could hear nothing but his own agitation. Then in the tube, he heard a diminutive sound. Yes, and again. A fluid hiss, like the sound of spit in one's mouth, so faint that it could have been from the other side of the universe. Yes, there again, irregular but fast, flickering. A whisper of pulse. He stopped and took his ear away from the tube. "What is that noise?" he asked. Seth became intent and modestly smiled. "It's her eye, moving," he said, "beneath the hard lid." He stared deep into the boy. "She is dreaming." One of the things that people ask me about before is about live, real people and imaginary ones. And this book is full of both. one has curiously escaped most people's attention, and I'm going to kind of bring that to light now. Raymond Roussel, who wrote the magnificent book Impressions of Africa. Impressions of Africa is not just a book. It's not just a narrative fiction. It's not just a surreal masterpiece. It's also a unique way of writing. He invented a way to challenge his imagination. I've never done that. This is a very simpler form. His is much more profound. But I took the name of the Vorrh from Impressions of Africa. It's a forest that he talks about, in which he places all of the events that occur in his book. I've also been attacked for being rather cruel to Raymond Roussel. I call him the Frenchman. Some people are only named by their nationality. Although I have enormous admiration for everything he did as an artist, as a human being, he wasn't that great. And his partner, Madame Dufresne, Charlotte, was paid to marry him, paid to be his partner by his mother, who was a heroin addict, and to give him a degree of respectability. He treated her like shit. And I always wondered about this. And then I saw the photograph. There's a photograph of them sitting together at a piano. And there's kindness. She has astonishing kindness. It's overpowering. You know a little bit about what their relationship was. And you think, how can she still have that? There must have been something, there must have been an attachment there which is not like the one that was paid for. There's something else. So I kind of built on that fiction. And she's in the book as well. She's a lot quieter than he is. I do terrible things to him in the book. I drag him to the jungle and drop him in the path of animals. He has a bad time, which he deserves. But, so I'm going to read, weirdly, the epilogue. Because I only found out when I talked to somebody else about this that the penny hadn't dropped because I hadn't made it that clear. So, in the epilogue, it's over, the story's over. Everyone's kind of disappeared or gone away, but she's still alive, and she was still alive. And then John Ashbery found her. He was determined, and he went to France, Belgium, and he found her. And he found her in pretty bad conditions. And then, so I started to write the first part of this, and then to find out what he actually did, and then changed it drastically, because he actually saved her. He actually changed her last years fundamentally. So the end is a kind of, after all the kind of grueling kind of horrors of the book, it's a little bit of something else. So, and it jumps, the time jumps. But this is the epilogue, and it doesn't give anything away, but it's, and I've never read it before. And forgive me, because it's called The American. Epilogue. The book was a present. Best throw it away to the bottom of the sea, where ingenious fish may one day read it, or not. John Ashbery, A Snowball in Hell. Belgium, 1961. The streets are livid with bright cars. They seem to run at the same speed as their horns. The sunburnt boulevard is engorged with primary colours. The American poet looks at his map once again. Brussels seems to be based on an irrational grid. Eventually, he locates the cul-de-sac, snatches up his briefcase and strides on past clipped gardens that are manicured to retentive perfection. As he walks on, the buildings become older and more disheveled. He arrives at the entrance of the public nursing home, enters and is met by the universal smell of old age, an idyllic ambience with urine and sour cooking. Here it is Central Europe, it is tinged with perfume and garlic. He talks to the staff in a remote French from his high school. Most of them are peasants or foreigners with accents weirder than his. He claims good, proper French taught to him and his classmates by a tutor from Montreal. The Moroccan woman in the stained threadbare uniform of blue and white takes him through the old house, which has been embalmed in magnolia and disinfectant. They climb 2 tasteless flights of stairs. The American's nervous and keeps pushing his spectacles back onto the bridge of his nose. She takes him into a large room full of seated women. Madame Dufresne, your visitor is here. All the women look around. He panics. He has no idea what she looks like now. Then a hand waves from a seat by the window. The once grand room had crumbled into institutional decay. He carefully crosses it, avoiding the damp patches and dropped objects that redesign the exhausted carpet. She is frailer than expected, doubly wrapped in a heavy shawl as the sun floods the streets outside. Madame Dufresne, good morning. Please allow me to introduce myself, he begins. Charlotte listens and smiles kindly at the incorrect precision of his French. He pretends to make an effort to engage in polite conversation, but soon tires of the charade and pounces on his only interest. For the next hour, he asks endless questions about the Frenchman, most of which he says are incomprehensible to her. She grows weary of the strain it takes to understand. She grows weary of the strain it takes to understand him, becoming more and more uncertain about what it is he actually wants. May we talk a little about the last days in Palermo? She is aware that he does not see her, does not look in her eyes. He is so appalled by her fall from grace that he cannot bear to acknowledge her tired gaze. He buries himself in the questions and pushes on relentlessly. Is it true that he could not sleep on his own bed and he had a fear of falling from it? Is that why he was on the floor next to the door when they found him? She thinks of the genius of the man and knows it was not what this large, lumpy American wants to know. Of her, his brilliance was not in his books or his words, but in the movements when he became unique, infused, individually human, doing what he loved the most. She thought of him sitting at the piano, playing improvised voices. He could mimic everything from the trams squealing outside to exotic animals, from opera divas to common street singers. It made them both laugh in that time, when he still could. Do you have any pictures of your time together? She expected this and pulled a large crumpled manila envelope from under her shawl. She digs into it and after a few moments produces a dog-eared photograph. They are posed like a married couple. She seated, him standing behind the chair. Her kindness radiates, even lending beauty to her startling hat, which resembles the neck of a dead inverted swan. The American is mesmerized. This is the best image of his literary hero he has ever seen. It shows a taut, immaculate man of precise, if diminutive, proportion. This is wonderful, truly wonderful. She warms towards him and relaxes. He listens as she begins to unwrap an explanation of what their relationship truly was. It has become quiet in the room. Even the incessant coughing has stopped. The lady's subtle strain to catch the details. As he is about to leave, he remembers the gift he has brought her and rummages about in his briefcase. He presents her with chocolates and asks if they can meet again. She is delighted and says that nothing would please her more. They meet 4 more times. On the last occasion, he visits her in her own room in an elegant private nursing home that houses her final days in peaceful dignity. He had worked hard ever since he first left the crumbling decay. He had instigated the move, and surrealism had paid for it. Now she shone in her reflective surroundings. She beamed into him, and he arrived and showed him around the room, pointing at her prized possessions, which had been locked away in storage for the last 9 years. She wanted to tell him everything, but so little detail he really wanted to know. And she already had forgotten so much. Only the joy and the spite remained, embedded over the years. The rest had fallen away. Nevertheless, they talked for hours. She enjoyed the company of the soft, shapeless man and did not welcome his final departure. He started to rummage in the briefcase, and she knew he'd already left. Like a disappointing conjuring trick, the chocolates had been transformed into a book. She stared at it as he adjusted his spectacles. I thought you would like this. It's just been published, the latest edition. She took it from him. It seemed unfinished, like without spine or hard covers. It's the first publication in paperback, he said gleefully. She thanked him and held it close. They said their goodbyes, and he slipped away, waving back to her along the long diminishing corridor. She knew she would never see him again. She crossed the plush carpet and lay down on the bed, bolstered slightly by crisp wet pillows. Her thoughts soft-edged and reminiscent. The dove had won over the raven, at least up to the very last days. She had thought hard and dogmatically for its victory. His cruelty had been painful to her, but nothing like the carrion bird that stabbed at his own heart continually. Now she would banish that and see him only as she wanted to, mimicking musical stars or playing Max Kinder's hopeless decadent fop, seated at the piano again, his fingers skipping across the keys, his warbling voice dimming into a plaintive hum. The book was in English. Its title sounded more emphatic that way, Impressions of Africa. He would have liked that. She imagined him reading it in his mock British accent he so enjoyed. She smiled, closed her eyes, and put the book aside. She would never read it, not in English. She had never read it in French. Questions, abuse. This is the old.
I just, you know, as we were working on the book, I always would come back around to this thought of your career as an artist and a sculptor. And it always fascinated me when you turned to fiction. I just want to know how that felt.
It's a really interesting question to ask artists, are you making fiction? We make a painting or a sculpture, or it's not a word that's used in art schools. It's not a word that's used in art criticism. But surely we are. Surely we're inventing fictions. We're making things from our imagination. We're composed of the world. So paintings are fiction. Everything we do that way. I'm completely obsessed by imagination and fiction. So the mechanisms I've chosen or been allowed to adopt and to use it have just been mechanisms to get closer to it. And I don't think that, and I've said it sometimes to my students when we talk about these things, if you take the things that I do, if you take text, making images, making installation and performance, and you shake it up and you empty it, it should be a film. What comes out should naturally be a film. Except that films take lots of people, lots of money, and endless time, and I'm impatient. So anything, I went sculpture because I could actually make it out of this. I could go, what happens if you do this? I'm not a carver. I don't take a block and I bring things together. But writing fiction I didn't think I could do it. I thought I could do it in poetry, and then it gradually dawned on me, rather late and rather stupidly, that I could invent things which I couldn't actually make because the things I wanted to make were kind of against sort of natural principles of gravity and those things. But of course you can say it. Which also explains my reaction and position to fantasy. I mean, I much prefer Edgar Allan Poe's description of mystery and imagination to the word fantasy, because I think that's a wider spectrum.
Did you make any changes to the American edition? Oh, no.
Would you like to answer? Tim is the editor.
We did some revisions, mostly structural things, but sort of building in chapters. And the biggest thing was we sort of flipped the Vorrh.
Yeah,
sort of,
where he was.
Yeah, it was a timeline.
You're being very modest, sir.
Yeah, we paired characters, and then we put in sections, and we put in chapters. I mean, the original, the honest edition, was 500 sort of 50 pages with just white space separating the ship. So you were coming into these interesting moments where you were jumping between the historical nature of the book to the more imagination and fantastical elements, and it was a matter of making that leap. So we just sort of put structural changes in.
What with Tim was actually one of the most interesting things I've ever done. And it was really interesting in the beginning, because when the first things came through, they came to the agent, who said, here it is. If you're going to freak with me first. And I read it, I can't see the difference, except I can read it better. And then there was this section, this huge line was taken out. Oh my God, he's taken out all of that. And I looked at it and thought, it's gobbledygook. I mean, I knew, because it was the beginning, once I had always had the first section, I knew what that was. But after that, it was clunky and it's full of, I mean, I have to describe the stuff you get in attics and what you call fruit cellars. You know, the bits and pieces you don't throw away, but they kind of get stuck together. And it was like that, but Tim kind of cleared all that. And suddenly it was there. I knew it needed it, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't. So I know in the second and third one, because it's a trilogy, it isn't there. Well, not as I know, but it's. But I couldn't go back and find it in the first one. I couldn't know how to. So I think what I explained to people, what this is a surgically enhanced version of the first one. You can actually read. It's as simple as that. And I couldn't have done it by myself. It's as simple as that. Yeah.
I was just sort of wondering, you know, I mean, obviously the character of the Cyclops, obviously this is someone you're fascinated by, and if this is someone you've always been sort of interested in, and how you kind of decided to build this story around him. I love mythology and all those characters, but
Yeah.
it's hard to think about building a
Yeah.
story around them that isn't necessarily mythological. It's really, it's kind of
That's because my interest in the Cyclops was because I saw a real one. A real one.
Oh!
A real human Cyclops. In the Hunterian Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons in London.
Wow.
In the back room there was this little thing just sitting there in its tank. And it had never made birth, or it had never been allowed to make birth, but it had red hair, double pupil. And it was horrifying, tragic, moving, and like, you know, the trouble about being the kind of imagination artist I am, you can't just walk away from things and let them be. You have to think, what the hell do I do with that? How can I make anything of that? You certainly can't use it or a picture of it. I couldn't do that. But some while later I was making a performance, and I had my face against a vitrine, and the cameraman had taken the picture, and the glass had made a reflection, so my face was doubled, and there it was, and I recognised it. That's it. It's the same thing. I can do it. I can actually be that. And it was just the simplest thing of a mirror and a camera. Which the moment you do that, you then got responsibility to say, well, what is it? Now I really have to work. But just standing there being a face is not enough. You have to go a little bit deeper. And so, you know, so the mythology was actually at the back of it, but it wasn't something I actually went. It wasn't the Greek one. Greek scientist's name. It's gone. So I started again. And one of the things I thought about was, okay, if you do have one eye, and you've only got one optic nerve, and our optic nerves cross. Weird. I mean, why? Why do our optic nerves cross? Why does that eye go to here and this eye go? I mean, so it never went the division of the brain. So perhaps the Cyclops doesn't have a divided brain, which is then a kind of, you know, brings a very different kind of creature into the world. One, if you don't have a divided brain, you haven't got any doubts. So he's never really gone away. He might have now. I never built this around him. It just happened. He couldn't stay out. I didn't build this around anything. They all walked in.
Yeah. I'll start by apologizing because I don't have a very well-formed question, but I'm interested in, especially because you make installations, which are a way of instigating the way people use space, right? You've also created kind of instigations of space in the book as well, and I'm curious to hear you talk about that. Sorry,
Okay.
yeah.
No, it's all right. I'm trying to think which end to grab it. Okay.
I'll throw into the mix that
Yeah.
I grew up in the middle of the woods, not scared of them, but having all my friends be very scared of them. I don't know if that helps, but I'm a poet, so I always try to triangulate things.
I think you're answering the question. Much better than I could. I'm not going to answer the first question. I'll comment on the second one. Of all the stories of forests, the one that moved me the most is Algernon Blackwood's The Man Whom Trees Loved. He's a greatly underestimated writer. There's just something about that which is, you know, and he claimed it was real. You know, he's not, everyone compares him to M.R. James and says he's a minor writer in comparison. M.R. James wrote brilliant stories, but basically to entertain young men at Christmas. Blackwood said he was there and it happened. This is a very different occurrence, and I think the stories show that. Going back to the installations, I think it's again about describing. The first bit of prose that I put together was called Written Rooms and Penciled Crimes, and they were descriptions of imagined installations, imagined performances, which basically I couldn't make. So it's always like trying to go to extend what you can do to make it more so, and if finance and time and all those things get in the way of making it in a particular way, you can invent it. So I think it's as simple as that. I don't think it works the other way around. I mean, people sometimes ask if I'm going to make art based on this. Never. I mean, I'm not going to make a picture or a physical occurrence of this. I can't. It's happened the other way around. And as I was doing this, I became also aware that I was, the only thing I was doing at the same time was writing with a laptop, was making little egg tempera paintings, small things. And I realised that my studio had shrunk to like the size of this. No, this is great, I can do this in a hospital bed or a prison cell. I don't need all this equipment anymore. It's actually, Because immediately I say that because I'm so perverse, and then go and make something which is well did. So I mean, but that's just me. But it's. I'm not sure that answered the question. I'm not sure it was a question, but
No, there wasn't.
it was a reflection. But I love what you said about the forest.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
Whether something's filled up or emptied out.
Yeah.
And how people approach it.
What do you think of someone like Tolkien as a writer and his creation of Middle Kingdom and all the stories that he's built?
I mean, I suppose I have the same measure of Tolkien as I do to Shakespeare. I mean, it's just there. And it's there so much that you can't, and that was long before the films were made, but it's just, I can't really go much further than that. I can't really go much further than just saying, it's there. And I suppose to try to avoid it in the same way I try to avoid Shakespeare or anything else which is so fundamentally there. It's extraordinary. But like all extraordinary things, it's kind of, it holds its place in the world by itself. So I don't really have a strong relationship with it. I mean, I don't have anything critical to say. I don't have anything sort of massively enthusiastic to say about it. I just recognise it as a unique thing. And
Do you think he's a good writer outside of his creation of all
you know, I can't remember. I can't remember if he, it's been a long time since I read it, but I can't remember if he was a good writer. I think he's a good storyteller. I'm not sure I remember anything tangible about the writing. I mean, I think he just takes things and events and people from place to place and you follow it. I don't ever remember stop. For example, if you compare that to Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, where you're reading the narrative and then suddenly you're stopped dead in your track by the poetry, literally. So you go, and you have to go back and read the words, because the words are sumptuous, tangible, poetic and beautiful. But where it's come from, where it's going next, it's kind of a horrible narrative. I don't think that's in Tolkien. I think it's a constant. I think it comes from a different kind of thinking process.
What about someone like D.H. Lawrence? What do you think?
Whoa! There's a jump. Okay. Oh God, that's been a.
I just found some of the books on the same shelf at the library.
Yeah. I think D.H. Lawrence is a better writer. I don't. Oh God, this is really difficult. Given the choice, which one would I take to a desert island? I don't know. That's a really hard choice.
Well,
Trying to go between two
books.
Yeah. Subject matter. Tolkien. Language, D.H. Lawrence. It'd be amazing to have something that actually mix them. That would be an interesting one. It's probably there, we haven't quite sort of twigged it yet.
Do you view your act of writing this novel as a piece of your performance art?
Do I, what was the first?
Your act of
Yeah.
writing this novel?
No.
How come?
The performance art is non-verbal in a very particular way. Performance art, for me, I never sit and compose or actually I don't know writing either. I think they're separate. I don't know what the membrane is that separates them. I think the imagination is the same. I just think the languages are different. And I think it's one of the things that when you continually confront the horrible reality of your imagination stopping, It's like walking up to a brick wall. And you look at the brick wall and you think, I can't get building it. My imagination has failed. But if you take one step back and you change the tools, you change the language, you can chip out a little bit more. So when I find my imagination has failed in a particular thing, I'll go to another form. And that form can sometimes get you around or through it, or at least make the passage further so you can take a few more steps. But it's not illustrative sort of performance in any way at all.
Do you still make performance art?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've done a couple recently. Oh yeah, no. Last time. When was it? No, I think last time. It was like a year ago, 2 years ago. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've just made some in Grand Rapids and Detroit, and in San Francisco. So I'm still doing it. I don't quite know why I do it. I mean, it doesn't pay anything or do anything except just do it. That's what I'm here for, you know. I quite believe in why we're here, why we're given these funny things to do.
To get you out of the house.
To keep me out of prison and off the street is more likely. I don't have any problem being in the house. It'd be a nice place to be. Yeah.
Mr. Brent. I kind of want to ask about the work of the work. So your process of writing, what that sort of looks like for you, even on just like a day-to-day level when you're working, and how you've touched on this a little bit, but
Yeah.
how you've made the transition from working on your artwork to this, and how that went.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this opened something that I had no idea about. And I've said this before, I'm afraid, but it's only I can't reinvent it. I had the opening sequence of this, and a little bit at the end, and that was all I had. And for years, I wrote poetry and I made the other things, but I didn't think I could write prose. So I got to page 3 and threw it away. Years, I mean, years and years. And then I'd gone on a plane to Australia, and I just read Cormac McCarthy's Blood Red Inn. And the influence out of it was enormous. I mean, I can't underestimate that. I suddenly saw, aha, oh, it could be like that. And I'd also been given, by someone I deeply distrust, another book to read on the plane, which was appalling. And this was a very eminent English writer. You know, I mean, and I got to like...
You can't say what that was.
No. And I just got, I thought, give me a break. And I thought, this is shit. And I thought, well, okay, well, do better. You know, so it was a kind of challenge. So that's what started it, and then it began. So I suddenly realised, and forgive me for this before, I got past page 3 quite quickly. So I'm going, and it's going on and on and on. And I'm waking up earlier and earlier in the morning and working on it, and it's going, okay. And then I suddenly didn't realise how far I'd gone. I didn't know how many pages. There's a wonderful book by John Fuller called Flying to Nowhere. It's a little novel like that, you probably know, it's like a tiny thing. So that's what I thought, I could get to there. I could get to, and then when I did the word count, I turned to the page count, and then went to my library and went, oh my God. You know, and I haven't even staged like halfway through. So, okay, well something's happening here. And I sent it out to friends. I had 6 friends who were very different people from very different places, just to make sure I wasn't writing Jack is a sad boy, Jack is a And they sort of came back and said, no, this is, we didn't know you could write like this. And I said, neither did I. I mean, it was as simple as that. And then it just went on, and it went on and on and on. And there are times, and it's repetition, but I can't reinvent it, it's true. And I'm going, he didn't. He didn't. I mean, I'm not, you know, I mean, when you hear radio, man, the book I'm not going to mention is always on the radio. The writers talk about things, they're always, you know, they're suffering and this. And this was never that. So to some extent, I don't quite understand. The only thing I understand is when it's finished, it is, and I walked away and it went, oh, no. And it carried on, and it hasn't stopped. So this is stopped, I think, just. But there's a lot of stuff. I'm taking a pause now, but perhaps I've just been waiting a long time to do it. And you know, when I talk to students, I say, well, you know, you can spend the same time talking about things in the pub. You know, take an hour out of doing that and write it in the morning before you say it, because you can just, it could always be, just do it. So that's my, I don't have a very sophisticated kind of process, I just wake up and write. So, you know, that's it really.
Sounds good.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you find that when you were writing, you really missed, you know, creating other pieces or sculpting, or did you sort of think about other ideas?
I didn't stop.
You did it all at once?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And talk. So, I mean, no. This is, no, the awful thing about this is it's lunacy. So I'm writing at 6 to 8 in the morning. I have half an hour sleep. I go down, literally downstairs. So my flat was above the school and teach in the sculpture department at lunch, and then lunchtime I make things in the workshop. So I mean, so it was. It's not stopped anything else. I keep wanting it to. I keep wanting it to go like, you know, I don't have to do that now. But it ain't like that. It just, and time's incredibly flexible. You know, if you just agree, you know, we all agree that it isn't, but it is. You can actually, you can do all these things. You just don't go to the pub as much, but you know.
Okay, well I think we're just about out of time, so let's go ahead and thank Ryan one more time.